So welcome. This is one of our first, actually our first live since the second round. You know what? So we're back here, and we are recording this, and it is on Zoom for people at home. So I think you all know Richard, but I'm going to make the introduction anyway. So Richard received his BFA from Syracuse University. He lives and works in New York City and part-time right here in Bantam. Richard has exhibited his work in solo and group exhibitions and museums and galleries and art fairs throughout the US and Europe. His work is shown globally in many public and private collections, including the US Library of Congress, the Cleveland Museum of Art, and the Detroit Institute of Arts, probably to name just a few of them, probably a lot more. So tonight I'm really excited. This show, this art exhibit, so to speak, will explore with us the connection and impact of life upon art, mind, upon matter. Very dear to my subject, very dear to my heart. So through analysis of his own compulsions, which is an interesting word I'm interested to hear more about, for perfection and order. I mean, this is a library, but there's a lot of perfection and order. That's one of the reasons I was drawn to it.
Yeah.
And research into mental health, the physical science, and philosophy, Richard brings a unique understanding of the relationship between mind and matter and their presence in the world around us. So thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, Sheila.
I'm going to go sit in the back.
Great, thank you.
Take this, and you're all set to go.
Great. Well, thank you, Sheila, for inviting me. I also wanted to thank Anne-Marie White and Ted Moy for setting all the technology up. And so why don't I get started? Let me get the remote. So, all right, I'm going to start by showing you some photos of my studio. All right, so this is my studio in the Bronx, and you can see it looks very tidy, and I have a white floor, you know, and I do the white floor mainly to help bounce the light, make even light, but, you know, it requires being relatively neat and clean, and I think about my studio sort of as like a lab where I work, right? So when I come in, I usually change my shoes. So I have a pair of shoes I leave there specifically for that space so I don't drag in dirt and stuff like that. And here's another view of the studio, my printing press. And so I try to keep everything, let me go back 2 slides. So I don't know if you can tell, but you can see there's these white boards on the floor under the painting easel, the cart with all my paints. So those white plastic sheets I can lift up and put down new ones. So that's where I stored the paint. So with paint drips, it gets on that, and I can always return it back to a nice clean surface. So one of the funny things is, the floor had gotten a little dirty, and I decided to repaint the floor. And when I did that, then this white cabinet, which I had had in my studio for about 20 years now, although I kept it pretty clean, it looked dirty and yellowed. So I ended up painting that. And then, you know, it's like one thing leads to the next. You can see this is my storage in my studio. I like to keep everything very organized and easy to find. I place everything in boxes. After I finish a work, I usually put it right. I make a box right for it. That not only protects it from dust and accidental spills and things, but then it's ready to go out for a show. This is the storage for some of the rolls and the materials. So everything has a very functional space, you know, but it's also very aesthetically pleasing and balanced. So these wooden shelves, you could see here in this slide, I had bought these when I moved into this studio space. I had bought these IKEA shelves. And I assembled them, and they're 2 sets of shelves. And after I assembled them, I saw that one of them was slightly warped, and that little 1/4 inch off at the top, I couldn't handle that. So I bolted them together, right, with that screw that you can see there. So that shows you a little sense of like down to the small, like 1/4 inch, 1/8 inch, 1/16 of an inch. There's a precision that I like to have in my life. So now when I go out into the world, I see things that kind of are what I would call like disturbances, right? So this vent was in a house where it was a new house, and I saw the vent, and I was walking by, and I thought, oh, it's crooked. I'll bend over and I'll straighten it out. So when I bent down and I tried to straighten it, I couldn't straighten it. And I thought, So I lifted the vent cover off, and I noticed that the duct was askew. And so obviously I can't straighten the whole ducting in the house. So I put the cover on, and I thought, all right, I got to live with that, looking at that. But that's the kind of thing. So I go around and I see things. For example, here's at one of the art fairs, the piece that's crooked over there. Now, there I can't go and straighten it because, you know, who knows, you know, it could be a $250,000 piece of art, and I don't want to have an accident. But there's a compulsion, like I'm compelled to want to straighten that. Here, I was walking down an office space or something, and these Post-it notes, I thought, how is that even possible that somebody could put up these notes in such a completely random way like that? So out of my realm of consideration for something like that. So I snapped a photo of it. Here, again, brand new building, crooked outlet. So, you know, it's all out there. Now, this, on the other hand, is very pleasing. There are the missing ones, right, which kind of bother me a little bit, but overall, the fact that they're all relatively, you know, symmetrical and even is very pleasing to me. Here in the store, again, there's some missing towels, but overall, the symmetry is very pleasing, and I like that. Here's a table with some objects on it, also, again, very pleasing. Here's another one where there's just a consideration of the balance of the things, right? This was a friend of mine. I was telling her about my work, and she said, oh, my daughter's like you. She said, well, and the daughter was all excited. So I said, well, do you mind taking some pictures of your stuff for me? I might use it for some art. And she said, absolutely. So this is one of the photographs she sent me. And I thought, you know, here, this is like, I think she's 13. Wow, that's amazing. That was definitely not my kids' drawers. Another friend's home. This one I found interesting, the way she did the symmetry with the books and then the objects on every other shelf like that. So pleasing things. So the thing is that my perfection and order in my environment started getting to a point where my family, specifically my kids, were saying to me, you know, Dad, we can't live like this, you know. They would come home from school, they'd put their backpack down on the floor, I'd have to straighten it, I'd have to pick it up, I'd have to hang it, you know, and if they moved something on the table. So I started to think about that, like, well, why? Why do I have to do this, you know, like, why am I compelled to do this? So I thought I'd start doing some research. So I started doing research into psychology, which then led me into some philosophy and the physical sciences, and but also, you know, hey, how are you? So anyway, so I started doing all this research, reading, but then I was like, you know, that's great, but I want to sort of go out into the world and start doing field research into it. So I started contacting friends of mine who I knew were also sort of organizationally obsessive compulsive. So I went to their environments, right? So here's Melissa. So you can say she's an artist as well. She makes amazing work, but this is her organization. Just everything has its place, you know, and there's a nice sense of balance and aesthetically pleasing. This is a woman I met in her home. Although it's very small, she has so many things within it, but it's so beautifully organized and designed. You can see my reflection a little bit in the glass in the mirror, so you can see the objects also behind me in the mirror. Like on that shelf with the mug and the little tin and the pig with the flowers. So her whole apartment was like this. Some of these, you'll see a painting that's based on this image, you know. So look at her handwriting and just how perfectly, or, you know, well written it is, and just beautifully laid out. her mail. Everything in her mail was all perfectly like sort of stacked and ordered. So I went into those homes, and then I thought, because of part of my research into OCD, there were other disorders that were sort of considered under OCD. They're no longer, I don't think hoarding disorder is any longer considered OCD, because they found that if you took somebody who suffered from hoarding disorder and brought them to somebody else's home who also suffered from hoarding disorder, they had no problem getting rid of that person's stuff. So it was just their own. So anyway, so that, reading about that, I thought, well, that's the exact opposite extreme, right? It's like to what I'm dealing with. So I started asking around and speaking to friends, and I thought, all right, maybe I could go do some field research into them. So Edward was actually the very first person I met with. So Edward is what's called an information hoarder, and that's somebody who holds on to magazines, books, newspapers, because they believe that there's valuable information in those papers. Now, I also attended a conference, like a professional conference on hoarding disorder in Philadelphia. That was, you know, academics and psychologists and therapists and organizers to learn more about it. And one of the things I learned is that over 90% of people who are affected by hoarding disorder had some sort of traumatic event in their childhood. So it's sort of interesting when I go into these environments that, you know, having just that one little bit of information, it allows you to kind of, when I'm talking to the people and photographing their home and hearing their stories, it's like you sort of start to see them as a child, and then you sort of start to see them as maybe an injured child. And it's sort of, so all of a sudden, an environment that could be very oppressive, or some people might think, you know, is disgusting or repulsive, it sort of fades away because you start focusing on the individual and their trauma. So this is a woman. You can see my feet in this photograph, and when I was in this room photographing, I took this photograph and I saw that my feet were in the photograph, and all of a sudden I realized that I was here, you know, by seeing myself, because usually through the camera lens, you know, it's a little bit removed. But when I saw that, and so I took a moment and I looked around and I thought, how did I end up here, you know, in this environment? And this is more from her home. And I started realizing too, so these are a couple of people that I met at the conference, because a few people who were at the conference also were affected by the disorder. And so when I met 3 people, and then I went back to Philadelphia to photograph their environments. And when I was going back to New York City after that visit, I started realizing like how much their stuff was kind of an extension of their personality. So for example, one of the people I met with when I was there, she was very introverted and quiet and kind of a little lonely, and all of her stuff was gray and beige and black and kind of nondescript. Whereas this woman, she was fun and gregarious. She had purple hair. She drove a bright green Prius. And it was like you could just see her home was like an explosion of color. And then another woman I met with, she was just telling me all about her childhood and the events that had happened to her and the things that went wrong in her childhood, but down to specific dates and places and people, and like very specific. And her home was filled with boxes and files, and it was almost like, you know, the evidence of all of that had occurred. So I started thinking about how much their environments were really like a projection or a continuation of their psyches. This guy was a fashion designer in the 80s, so obviously, you know, very concerned with the body, but his home had, you can see the bookshelves in the back. This is all pornography, right? So there's just a real obsession with the physical human form. This is his desk. So I thought, all right, now I want to make work about this. So I think the first work I have to show It's based on the hoarding disorder. So I call this, so in my work, I sort of think about it like this. I have one simple idea, and that is to represent the relationships between our mind and our physical surroundings, and how that is evidenced in how our psychology is evidenced in our physical surroundings. So I'm going to show you a couple of different series, and they look very different from one another, but they're all coming out of that one central idea. Because as I was doing the research, all of these different ideas started popping into my mind about, oh, I could make this and I could make that. And I thought, well, why am I going to limit myself to just making one type of work when I have all of these ideas? So I started executing them all, right? So these are the paintings that are based on some of those environments you saw. These are oil on linen, and each one is 5 feet by 5 feet. I started working on these. I was at a residency at Mass MoCA, and I was working on them there. So in these, you can see there's a simplification and a reduction to the forms and things like that, because I'm not so interested in what the objects are. So I take out logos, I take out text or anything like that. I really want to just represent the physical mass of the forms, right? I wish I should have put a detail slide, because when you see these up close, you can, because they look very tight and crisp and all of that, but up close you can actually see some of the brushwork and the hand in the work. And the other thing is, you know, actually on the screen you're getting a good sense of the scale, but they're actually even larger than that in person. And there's something about the scale when they're very large and you see them in person. You know, right now you're seeing it for people on Zoom, they're seeing these like small images, and so they look crisp and tight. But in person, there's an abstraction that comes, and you start losing the details. But it's also interesting that, you know, the way the mind works. Also, you could see I use flat colors. I don't really do blending in my painting. And it's amazing how the mind works and just kind of connects everything and creates the forms out of that. This is not on canvas. This is on Mylar, which is a drafting film that architects use. This one as well. And I saturate it with a lot of color because, in a sense, you know, these people are kind of compelled to take things, so there's an allure to them. And so in a way, through the use of bright and seductive color, I can kind of maybe mirror that desire for wanting, you know, for being attracted to something. So in this series, I use a lot of color. These are watercolors. These are 12 inches by 18 inches. So now getting back to me, right, with the perfection. So this is a series that, one of the things I realized, so in my home we have these candles, these 6 candles, and I usually keep them separated out about 6 inches apart. One day I came home and somebody had pushed them together into groupings of 2. And I looked at that and I said, no, 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 that's wrong, you know? And I was like, that's unacceptable. And I separated them out. And when I separated them apart, all of a sudden what happened was I saw the space between the forms as strong as the forms themselves. And I thought, you know what, that's a big part of it. And so I started thinking, and I'm a big, I don't know if you're familiar with the work of Solowit, but Solowit does these plans, and he tells you how to do for these mural drawings and paintings. And so when you buy a Solowit, you actually just get a set of instructions that explain how to create the work on the wall. And I was always a big fan of Solowit, but I'm a representational painter. He's a conceptual artist. So for years, this was in the back of my mind, like, how could I get more concept into my work? So when I pulled those candles apart and I saw that negative space so physically, I thought that's what it's about. That's what my perfection and my compulsion is for the balance of all of these forms and negative spaces. So what I thought I would do is create a body of work that sort of played on that. So this is a diagram that then you install. So the sort of gray-green and the gray and the black, that's actually painted on the wall. And then the painting with the red is installed on top of it. You can see there. So I thought about, and I give you the specific dimensions of the rectangle to paint, how high off the floor, the precision of each of those bands, and then the precise location of where that panel needs to be hung, right? So this work allows me, because one thing I found is like, you know, in life, yeah, I can arrange things and then I come home and it's wrong. But here in art, I can make it permanent. So I can't like achieve perfection in my life, but I can do it through the art, right? And it's going to stay that way, you know. That makes me happy. You know, nobody's going to touch it because it's art too, you know. So there's a detail of it. So here's another plan. This one's called self-portrait. Oh no, this is Amy, I'm sorry. The other one was a self-portrait, so it was based on something in my home. Sorry? Yeah, the dish towel, right. And my desire to always center it on the handle of the dishwasher, you know? Yes. And there, and in that, and it's like perfectly ironed in the painting, you know, it's absolutely perfect. And again, here you can see I'm reducing down the forms, right? Like I'm getting rid of text and things like that. So this one is 4 panels. So the paintings are oil on linen over panel, and each one gets installed on top of the thing. But the other thing about this work that was interesting is there's an artist named Rachel Whitered. I don't know if you know her, but she casts the negative space of with concrete. Like she'll turn a chair over, she'll fill it with concrete, then she'll remove the chair, and you're left with the negative space. So she's showing you something you can't see. So one of the other areas I'm interested in is there's a part of philosophy that's called phenomenology, which is really trying to understand, it's like the study of how we come to perceive our reality the way that we do. And there's something called epiché, which is about this reduction of the object. So for example, if you have a candle and it's blue and scented, you say, okay, well, can I take away, can it be red? Yes, so that's a trait you would take away. Can it be scented, unscented? You take that trait away. And the idea is to get down to the essence of the thing. So for a candle, it's wax, right? And you know how anytime you see something that's wax, you're like, that's wax. So there's an essence to the thing itself, right? So through the reduction, I'm kind of trying to get to the essence, but still leave something that so you kind of know what it is, the way you do with the wax. So that's one thing. But getting back to Rachel Whitered and showing the negative space, so I'm reading all of this phenomenology and about how we perceive our environment, and I'm thinking like the way a child, when you have a young child and you give them something that they've never seen before, there's sort of a sense of wonder on their face when they see something for the very first time. And I started thinking about our environments and how much we take for granted the physical form. So Rachel's showing you the negative. Well, I want to remind you of what is there and that you take for granted. So in a way, I'm sort of trying to represent our physical environment to you in a new way. So you sort of see it anew, right? Here's another one. This guy had all these light switches in vertically arranged, which I found very interesting. But then I don't know if you noticed the third one down on the left, all of them were in the same position except for that one. And I thought, oh, that's a very subtle little detail, and somebody may notice it, you know, or may not. But there's a nice sense to the light switches. And so in a way, I'm combining two things, especially with this work. So it looks very trompe-l'oeil, like it looks like real light switches. So it's sort of taking this European tradition of trompe-l'oeil painting and combining it with sort of this minimalism school of painting and sculpture. Conceptual, making it conceptual. Here's the piece I made based on that vent, and now it's straight finally, right? And all the works are usually titled the name of the person whose environment it was, right? So this one's called Matthew #1. Because I do feel like it's sort of expressing something about, it's sort of a portrait of their mind in a way, the way they think. So I think of them as portraits, but I also think of them as still lifes. Here's the one that's based on the desk. So this has 4 panels, and they're at, I don't know if I have a detail on that, no. Yeah, so each one's at a little different height too. This is the sketchbook I keep for these, so when I'm figuring them out, I'll contact the person, ask them colors and things, dimensions, and then I make notes. So I make all of these pieces based on action, so they're to actual size. You can see here I downloaded the light switch, the plate size, all of that, the little sensor so that I could make everything accurate to the actual size. This one, the wood, obviously I couldn't use wood, so I tried to find a color that matched it as best I could. Now this piece, this is called Self-Portrait Number 1, and this is 60 paintings. So the paintings are oil on mylar, which then I mount onto a steel plate, and then in the wall are magnets recessed into the wall, so each plate gets pulled up onto the wall. So this is a recreation of the shelves that I keep in my studio, and you can see everything is in its precise, perfect little location. And again, here, there's sort of a nod off to minimalism and artists like Donald Judd or Joseph Albers with the square. And I also kept the perspective. Every single cube has a one-point perspective, right? So I wasn't really concerned with representing it like a trompe-l'oeil, like an actual angle, because then the perspective, you'd see the bottom shelf, you'd see the top of the top shelf, you know. So here, because when I'm arranging these things, I'm not thinking them really as the whole, in the whole. I think about them in each cube as its own sort of little compulsive organizational puzzle. And so I sort of, that's why I kept the perspective individually. So that's how they look up close. And I realized also that this was sort of another sense of a self-portrait, because all the objects, let me go back a couple slides. All of the objects sort of represents different parts of me. So on the left, where all the books are, sort of maybe a representation of my mind, my thinking, the things I read. Then in the boxes, there's some photographs, family photographs, you know, postcards and things from my shows. Then there's an award there that was from when I worked in advertising. Sketchbooks, you know, so that's sort of keeping, you know, inspiration from life, and then my supplies and my materials for making the work. So it sort of kind of encompasses my whole life through my things.
What are the dimensions again?
Oh, so each cube is 14 inches, 14 1/4 wide by 14 3/4 high. So also based on the actual size. And then there's spaced 1 1/4 between each panel to represent sort of the actual frame of the bookcases that I have. And again, no text. Again, just about the forms, the negative space, the forms, all of that. This is how they look from an angle, so you can sort of see the shadow and the steel plate a little bit from that.
How big is the plate?
Oh, I think it's like a 24, 26 gauge steel. It's, you know, less than a 1/16 of an inch thick, so it really looks like it's right on the wall. This is another piece. So during COVID, somebody asked me to be in a show and wanted to make, the show was called A Lot Has Changed Since Then, right? And I thought about how we're sitting at home and how we're looking at all of our stuff, and I'm looking at this one thing, and I was like, well, those boxes, they could be here, and they could be here, and they could be here, and they could be here. So I thought, okay, I'll make a piece about that. So I did it the same way I did the bookcases, oil on mylar on steel. But, you know, this actually, I think, is a real nod to Donald Judd, who, you know, would make these metal boxes, and then he would have, you know, the same box, but inside the box would be a plane. And in one box, the plane would be on the left side, one would be on the right side, one would be in the middle. So I'm sort of thinking about that a little bit as well. And the reason I titled them Vexations is because they're like a puzzle, in a sense, you know? So here's a piece that I have. This is 15 watercolors, and it was inspired by when I was at the residency at Mass MoCA. One day I got to the studio, and it put, because the apartments that they gave you in the studios were separate. So every day I would pack my backpack, I would get my coffee, whatever. I would get over to the studio and I put the objects down on the desk. And one day I put them down and I thought, oh, I really like the way those are arranged. So I took a photograph of it. When I got back to my studio in New York, I looked at it and I thought, you know, those objects could be arranged in 1,000 different ways. So I set up a little area in my studio and I moved the objects around and I photographed them. And I took about 60 photographs and then I selected from those 15 that I thought would look good together. Anyway, so then I made these in watercolor and I worked on them all at the same time, so everything would be exactly the same, the thickness of the paint and all of that, and the colors. But one thing I find kind of interesting, which came out, it wasn't an intentional thing, but when I put them up, it almost looked like some sort of computation or code. And I thought that's so interesting because that sort of relates to the way we think about information and the way we process information and patterns, look for patterns and things in our life. The other thing that was interesting about it too was, you know, again, getting back to phenomenology and this idea of how we perceive our reality is through our senses. And I realized that each object sort of represented a different sense, right? So there's the phone, which is sight, could also be for touch. The pencil is for touch. The mug would be taste and smell. The headphones for hearing. And then the sketchbook was for sort of mind, represented mind. This is another series that I call Relics. So one of the interviews that I did, I asked the woman if she knew how she came to, you know, be affected by hoarding disorder. And she said after many years of therapy, she learned that as a child, her parents were absent in her life. And she started to turn to their things, in order to get a sense of who they were as people. I thought, wow, that's so incredible and sort of intense. But we all kind of do that. Like we save things, right? Because of the memories they link us to. But a lot of times people save things that are broken, that are no longer functional, right? And I thought about that and I thought, you know, we're holding on to something that absolutely has no utilitarian function because of what it's linking us to, right? So my parents are no longer alive. And so what I do is I go to flea markets, I go to garage sales, things like that. And I look, and sometimes I find things that I remember from my home growing up. So I buy those objects, and then I break them, right? And then I make a still life painting, and I paint them in the way of kind of the Dutch painters, you know, because I like the idea of that one central light source on the object because it imparts like a sense of importance on that thing. This is important. And to the person who's holding on to that thing, even if it's broken, it is very important. Some cases more extreme than others, of course. And the other thing is, a curator once asked me why I didn't have a background behind it. And I said, because the background is going to bring attention to, it's going to lead your mind down another road, right? I don't want it to be about where this object is. I want it to be solely about the thing, right? So each of these paintings, so I was also in a show where the curator wanted us to do, I was working on this series and she said she was doing a show using augmented reality. And would I like to be in the show? And I said, yes, of course, because as an artist, you take every opportunity you can get. But she said, oh yeah, no, I'll send you some information on the augmented reality. And I said, great, great. The minute I got off the phone, I called my son. I said, what is augmented reality, right? And he said, oh, you know, blah, blah, blah. He explained it to me. And I thought, okay, I could use this in this work, right? So each one of these paintings has a little film. So when I get the object and I bring it back to my studio, I look at the object and immediately a memory will come back, right? One memory. But I'll sort of close my eyes and I'll immerse myself in that memory, which then leads to another memory, which then leads to another memory. And I sort of go down this rabbit hole of memories, which is really fun. I guess, or it could be scary, I guess, depends on what the memories are. But sort of this like Proust type of thing, going from one thing into the next. And when I find a memory in there that I find interesting, or I think would make an interesting little film to go with the object, I pull that memory out and then I make a little film, right? So this piece, I found some old footage that my grandfather had shot in 1946. There was a blizzard in New York, and he had shot on 16 millimeter some footage of my mother. Now, this vase reminded me of a vase that was in my grandparents, in the bed, my mother's bedroom in my grandparents' house, right? So it made me think about them thinking about my mother. So when I found this old footage, I thought that would make a nice film to put with this. So it's sort of a little bit sentimental, but it's the only one that I think of this series that has sort of a sentimental feeling to it. But this just shows you the thing, how it works. So you put the phone, let's see if it'll play. Worked before.
Is there another slider?
Oh, there we go. Here we go. Okay, so you put this app on your phone called Artivive, and then the app launches, and then you point it at the object, and it registers the object, and then it launches the film right on top of the painting. And so the memory, the film, is kind of trapped in the object. So when somebody buys this painting and brings it home, they're getting the memory with the object. And that's how that works, right? I made another piece that had a film that I thought was sort of interesting, and the collector who bought it, just the minute she saw the film, she said, "Oh, I want that painting." So I put that film on here. So this was the painting. Just a little glass bottle missing its cap. So here we go. So all the films are very different. So that's that body of work.
Can you say more about the film and that last one?
Nope. That one I want to leave to your own interpretation. I think it's more fun that way, right? It's like when somebody reads a book, we can all read the same book and have different interpretations, right? And the therapist is the one that asked me that question for all the people at home, you know? It's interesting, of course. I know. I'm just kidding. Anyway, so just to tell you something that's coming up. In my continued research, I have a friend who's the head librarian at the Metropolitan Museum of Art, and I was telling him about my work and about things and objects and hoarding and collecting, and he said, and we were talking, and I thought, you know, the museum in a way is sort of society's, you know, collection, right? The things that we deem to be important and all of that, and are holding on to. So that's sort of society's hoarding is what's in the museums. So I said to him, you know, could I come see the library, you know, your storage in the library? And he said, absolutely. So I went, and there was a section, you know, most of the storage were books, you know, that are related to the art that's in the museum. But I said to him, I said, you know, these are all just vertical bookshelves. Do you have a section that's maybe rare manuscripts or folios and things? And he said, oh yeah. And he took me to the section, which is all under lock and key. All of these boxes have objects or transcripts and books and things in them that are very valuable, but the care with which they're stored. And these shelves actually roll out, the box is open, so you don't even actually have to lift the manuscript out of the box. I just thought that in itself was very beautiful. And I thought that that might make an interesting body of work. So I'll show you a few of my field research photos from that. Just the beauty of and the colors and the pastel and all of that. So I'm thinking about maybe starting a body of work based on museum storage as well. So society's hoarding. But all the other series I keep making as well, you know, and it allows me to jump from, some days I feel like, because the perfection pieces they require a lot of precision and concentration, and that's great. But sometimes I'm not really in that frame of mind. So then I'll work on more of the hoarding pieces because they allow me to paint and be a little freer and more gestural and all of that. So I can bounce around on these various bodies of work. You know, sometimes I'll find an object, so I'll make another relic painting and build the series. So that's the work. That's my Instagram if you want to follow. And so I post things on there. I post my art. I post my announcements, anything that I might be doing. Also, I sometimes post inspiration, images, disturbances in the world that I see, and things that are pleasing as well. And that's all. Thank you. How am I on my timing? Okay, good. Perfect timing. Good.
Of course. I'm just going to stop the sharing so that people at home can see you, but you can ask questions.
Oh, sure.
Don't mind me.
To figure out where to stand. I guess I could stand right here. Am I going to be on screen?
I'm going to try to stop share.
Sure.
There we go. So now you can see everybody.
Oh,
Everybody
cool.
can see you.
Great.
Okay, and if they ask questions, I'll just read them out.
That's so
I'll
nice.
leave everything else before.
Thank you all for coming on Zoom. I appreciate that. That's great. So yeah.
How much time do you allot to your paintings?
How much time?
Yeah, when you're going into some of the ones that we've seen there,
Yes.
how do you break up your time, or how much time does it consume on certain
Pieces. So depends on the piece too. But usually I kind of like to, when I start something, I like to finish it before I move on to the next. So even though I bounce around, I'm very strict about completing a piece and then moving on to the next one. So they vary in time. I guess the scale affects them as well. But you know, the large paintings based on the hoarding environments, those took maybe 3 to 4 weeks each. You know, those I worked on simultaneously. I worked on several of them simultaneously because I thought I might be able to speed up my production by doing that. And I was a little bit, but not enough to really make a difference. But one of the things that was interesting about that, so I had 7 of them actually in my studio, and they're large, so they were really surrounding me. And after about, you know, a couple of weeks working on them, I just started feeling down, and I didn't really, just this oppressive feeling, this depression. I didn't really know why. There was no reason for me to feel that way. Anyway, so I kept working on the paintings, and then I finished them. And then I put them into the rack system, storage. And I only left one out. And all of a sudden, this feeling went away. And I thought, wow, how incredible. Like, in a way, I had immersed myself into somewhat of a hoarding environment by working on these paintings. And how subconsciously that was affecting me without me even really realizing it. So now I work on one at a time. You know, but they do, and then the perfection pieces, those, I was just out of residency and I worked on 5 paintings, all of the same exact thing. One of them has a slight variation in it, but those are almost done, and those took me the full month, just working on those. Yes?
So someone at home comments on the obvious, which was a fascinating presentation. There's a question. Have you received reactions to your art from the people who were your inspiration?
Have I received reaction from the people who were my inspiration? Yes, I have, and the reaction has been very positive. As I mentioned, I just titled them with their first names. I do on my website, which is just richardpasquarelli.com. I also have field research photographs there, but. Yes, a couple have come to my shows, and they were so flattered by how I depicted their stuff, you know, because I didn't. It's not about, you know, repulsive. You know, a lot of people could look at these environments and be repulsed by them. You know, some of the very severe ones where there's a lot of filth and things, but it's not about that. It's more about, you know, seeing within that individual and their passion for their compulsion, you know. Oh yes,
I just wanted, I have a question and also an observation about flatness in your work.
Oh, yeah.
I was really, struck by that first image of your studio and the seeing an image of your studio, of the images of your shelves, and and sort of like the experience of maybe working in a space like that where you have those sort of tomboy shelves there, which I imagine sometimes are not always there. Maybe that you were working on that work and it was
that piece actually took about a year to make.
Oh yeah. The shelves are kind of interesting architecturally, and so in thinking about maybe you have some reflections yourself about flatness and flattening and the process of flattening space. But I had a specific question about your choice to use those thick canvases on the trompe-l'oeil ones that were on the painted walls, so that you chose rather than a super thin canvas or a plate or a sheet of mylar or something. It's this image that that whether it's the tea towel that was painted on and the light switches, but then they don't go all the way around the edge.
Correct.
So,
yes. Interesting.
I'm sure that so is that thickness, that choice of thickness.
That choice of thickness is usually related to the actual thing. And another part about that work that I didn't mention is let's say you have a wall that's 20 feet long, right? Blank wall, and you put up 4 or 5 things on that next to each other, right? They all of a sudden become a grouping, right? But there's nothing there other than your mind that's grouping them, right? And so the choice to paint the rectangle on the wall, as opposed to just making this a 2-dimensional painting of the whole thing, was a way of sort of showing that imaginary boundary that your mind creates, right? And so in a sense, it's like I'm recreating an existing environment. So if you buy this piece and you have it in your home, I'm transporting one environment into another environment and creating that grouping then within that space. So the canvases, the depths are, yes, usually determined by the actual environments.
Pretty shadow.
You do get shadow, which creates, a lot of times people have asked me, like, they don't realize that these pieces are 3-dimensional. So that's why I always try to show the side view, because it's when you see it 2-dimensional, like frontal, you might think those shadows are painted or whatever.
Yeah, sure. Seeing them in space
is very different. Yes, I'll be showing those pieces in a show in a couple of weeks in New York at a gallery called Robin Lee Programs. Those pieces plus the bookcase painting. There's another question.
Yeah, there's someone at home. Her name is Michelle, and she's from Southbury. She said, "Outstanding, thank you. You put such a beautiful reference for the nature of things."
Thank you, Michelle.
Has being a practicing artist changed the way you live your life day to day over the years?
Oh yeah. Well, I'll tell you, having gone through all of this work, I've definitely chilled a bit in the home front, because I think I can get it out here, which is great. So in a way, it's been my therapy, which is good. But yeah, it's changed, I guess, my way of thinking about our physical surroundings, and in ways that I hadn't really ever thought about before. So thanks for that question. Yes.
So your last slide said thank you. I was just thinking thank you.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you for giving us the insight into your thinking and this world that so many people tend to pathologize,
yes.
OCD, and you really turned it. There's no shame in it. This
thanks.
is who I am.
Right.
And you created this beautiful artwork.
Thank you.
And so, having seen your artwork over the years, I feel like this has just given me so much insight.
Thank you. Well, I think it's really important to actually talk about all things mental health, because it destigmatizes them. And then but also one of the things is a lot of times I'll do a presentation and people will come up and they'll say, "Oh, I do that." And so there's a connection. We all do it to some degree, some more severe, some less. But I think that when people can, that's where empathy comes from, is when they can see themselves within something else, you know, and I think that's really important. Oh, another question.
Just on the heels of Eileen's comment, it's so funny because Mary Lou she said, thank you. As a therapist, I sincerely appreciate your compassion. To those who may feel their compulsions, they have beauty others may not see.
Thank you. Thank you, Mary Beth. That's very kind of you to say. Yeah.
I have a question regarding your interactions with the hoarders.
Okay.
So, what was the first visit like compared to the last person you visited?
Oh, that's a good question. Well, in regards to that, okay, so first, one thing I learned actually by going to that conference is to not call people hoarders, but to call them, to say, no, it's okay, everybody does it, is to say people affected by hoarding disorder. So that it's not their identity, you know, it's their illness or whatever. But yeah, the first person I went to, Edward, it was, I was so nervous. Because I knew I was going into an environment that was going to make me anxious because of the way I was. And no less, it was like August in New York City, and it was maybe 90 degrees out. And I got into his apartment, and it was about 10,000 degrees. And I thought, oh, thank God I wore shorts and a T-shirt. There was no air conditioning. But you know, his home was filled completely with all of these. One of the things they describe it, they call them goat paths, where you have piles and you have very narrow spaces to walk through. So I'm sort of walking like almost feline to get through the apartment, and then trying to find places to put. I thought I would bring my tripod. That was pointless. But that experience was great because as I'm photographing his home, I'm talking to him and kind of interviewing him and learning about him. And that was it. That's the empathy thing. Like all of a sudden, I was no longer concerned with the environment, the stuff. You know, my anxiety just completely went away because it was just like talking to somebody about whatever, you know. And again, and then now it's to the point where I feel very comfortable going into all of these different environments.
So
photographing.
You're able to disconnect.
I am able to disconnect. That's interesting. Yeah. Yes.
I just want to say this is just incredible.
Oh, thank you.
And when you pointed out something that captured me, some abstraction and color to capture. I don't want to say the seduction, but it's amazing to me. I've never done an exercise like this creatively, where number one, you're expressing your own emotion.
Yes.
And then you're flipping it, and you're going into the opposite. And I feel that you capture that same feeling on both sides. Which
thank you.
It's just. I find it stunning, and I would love to see more artwork. And I would love to see environments where we talk about these issues, cultural issues that we process through art. Because you do set an environment that isn't so contextualized.
Yes.
So like, yeah, we meet here. And it's actually interesting, I wonder, in some subconscious way, where there is the intersection between the hoarder and the compulsive hoarder person. Like,
yeah.
And the compassion. And that, because I feel that I see that in your work.
Oh, thank you.
And I do want to say one thing with the little experience out of enthusiasm, that I needed something clicked to me as I was looking at order of storage. Because as I look at some issues around museums, the hoarding of storage.
That's right.
Cultural hoarding. Because sometimes when you talk to artists such as yourself, you great art, and you're not sure everyone's going to see it again.
Yeah.
Because it's going to be
in storage. Yeah, and you know, that's to that point.
And how much is enough?
That's right.
Like, I think, like,
at what point?
Culture is culturally in this culture. How much is enough?
Yes, it's a lot. How much is enough? You know, I mean, that touches on a whole nother Buddhist kind of philosophy of like how we, you know, and William James, the talked about how a man identifies his sense of self also through his things. And when those things wax and wane, so does his sense of self. And the Buddhists talk about that as well, and how we create our sense of self through the things that we're collecting or buying or whatever. But the storage thing in the museum is interesting because at the library, at the Met, they're running out of space. And now their books, all the books in the storage are stored, you know, based on Dewey Decimal System. So there's all these gaps of air because some books are big and some are short. So the librarian is actually devising a whole new system that's going to be storing them all based on size. So they can even so they can use up some of that negative space. So that's an interesting thing as well.
And which is also people, I think, encouraging collectors and collectors saying, we'll share with you. Share with
yes,
you.
And the people who share their collections, whatever, you know, with the arts, there are people like Beth Rudin-Woody, who has built a building, and so she does curate shows in Florida of her collection, and she rotates the collection and allows the public to come in and see it. So I think that's great. Yeah, right. Did you have another question back there? Or no?
It was just a comment, Francis. I particularly appreciate your work with people with hoarding disorder. It makes me think about the possessions, the relative personals as well. So I think it.
Yeah, thank you,
Fran.
Fran.
Most of us know somebody, if they're not classical or labeled.
No, right.
That you have a tendency to
collect.
things.
Yes. Yeah.
Behavior.
Absolutely.
Way to look at it.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you very much, and thank all the people at Zoom, too, people on Zoom.
Right
so thank you for coming tonight.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.